have spoken of the American century. I say that the century on which we are entering can be and must be the century of the common man.
A radical redistribution of economic power.
I mean, we know that racism is just a byproduct of capitalism. Everything would be all right if everything was put back in the hands of the people.
We need a government that will make sure Americans are taken care of and organize the economy to serve the people, not the profits of a wealthy few.
We now have the techniques and the resources to get rid of poverty.
We got to start getting out there with the people.
Get out of the movement and get to the masses.
We need a government of action.
You may not realize this, but Beethoven was a revolutionary. Beethoven very much was a revolutionary. His Third Symphony was dedicated to Napoleon, but then when he found out that Napoleon had proclaimed himself to be the emperor, he crossed it out. It was the Eroica Symphony, the heroic symphony for a hero, and he crossed it out. And he very much identified with the revolutionary movement to bring down feudalism, with the struggle for science and for the Enlightenment. I believe it was his Sixth Symphony. He actually had a piece in it that was dedicated to the peasantry and dedicated to the revolutionary peasantry of Germany and France and other parts of Europe that were fighting against feudalism and fighting for their rights. And so I wanted to just play the section from Beethoven's Sixth Symphony, the Shepherd's Hymn dedicated to the peasantry, to set the tone for the final presentation that will conclude today's class. Okay, so that was from Beethoven's Sixth Symphony. One of the first hints I got that maybe what I'd been told about communism was wrong was when my family hosted a student from Bulgaria. We hosted a college student from Bulgaria, and we were acting as his host family. You know, he had lived in Bulgaria when it was a socialist society. I asked him at the time, is there anybody who still believes in communism in Bulgaria? And he said, yes, my grandfather. And I said, really? And I said, why does your grandfather believe in communism if it was so horrible? He said that after the Second World War, at the time, Bulgaria didn't have any paved roads. And so, after the Second World War, his grandfather and all the young men in Bulgaria had come together to pave the roads of the country. And that his grandfather remembered the building of the roads in Bulgaria as one of the most beautiful experiences that he'd ever had, being mobilized to go from city to city, to town to pave roads in this country that had not had paved roads before. His grandfather was a loyal communist to the end because of that experience, because of the difference it made of mobilizing the people to build. And when we talk about revolutionary organizations, when we talk about what it means to be an organizer, and we talk about the difference between the synthetic left and what they advocate, and what they're trying to offer people, the release of anger, the release of impulses, and what one gets from being a member of a real revolutionary organization, I often think about a comrade of mine who died. He was an older man, and he could remember the 50s, and he lived in New York City, and he was of Jewish heritage, but every day, everywhere he went, he wore a Palestine baseball cap. And he would go from newsstand to newsstand in New York City, making sure that they carried this communist newspaper. And he made sure that they had the weekly communist newspaper at his newsstand. He went through the streets of New York City wearing his Palestine baseball cap. And every time you saw him, he was full of optimism. He always had something beautiful to tell you. He always had something to tell you about how he had just met somebody who'd given him a thumbs up for his Palestine baseball cap. Or he'd just met somebody and gotten them a subscription to the communist newspaper. And even though we know he experienced a huge amount of negativity and he experienced a huge amount of disgust. You know, New York City is not exactly a stronghold of pro-Palestine sentiments. Every time you saw him, he had a smile on his face, and he had enthusiasm, and he was there to tell you about what he'd done to build the revolutionary group, to give you words of encouragement. And they talked about that at his memorial service, how he had been optimistic, not just in a political sense, but in a personal sense, spreading hope, spreading joy, and spreading optimism among his comrades. When I went to the World Festival of Youth and Students in 2013, that was a life-changing experience for me, because that was the first time I'd seen communists from different parts of the world. I saw communists from Africa, communists from Asia, communists from Latin America, huge communist parties from places like Angola and Vietnam, communist parties in places like Bolivia and Venezuela. And the way those communists operated was very, very different, very, very different than the way communists operated in the United States. You know, in the United States, if you want to be a communist, they say you have two choices. You can be extreme and crazy and screaming in the protest cage, isolated from society, or you can just join the Democrats. For the most part, you kind of abandon your socialist beliefs and just kind of become kind of an underground operator within the Democratic Party apparatus. And what I met in Quito, Ecuador in 2013, and the folks I met with in 2017 in Sochi, Russia at the World Communist Youth Gathering, they were something quite different, quite different. They were not people who'd abandoned their beliefs. They weren't sellouts. They weren't people who hid their communism. But they were also not ultra-leftists, and they were not isolated from their society. They led organizations of millions of people, trade unions and student organizations. And you know, they wore suits and ties. It's practically forbidden in American communist circles, but they wore suits and ties. And what I was meeting was real socialists, serious socialists, worker politicians, people who had entered the political process on behalf of the working class. And they understood that it was the working people, the people who produced the wealth of their country, that would make history. And they had dedicated themselves to connecting with the broad masses of people, building organizations and representing them, and utilizing scientific socialism as a way to fight for their rights and to eventually establish socialism in their country. I don't want to read too much of this, but Karl Marx, his letter to Abraham Lincoln, this is what he said. He said, "The working men of Europe feel sure that as the American War of Independence initiated a new era of ascendancy for the middle class, so the American anti-slavery war will do for the working class. They consider it an earnest of the epoch to come that it fell to the lot of Abraham Lincoln, the single-minded son of the working class, to lead his country through the matchless struggle for the rescue of an enchained race and the reconstruction of a social world." And read Lenin's letter to the American workers, which you can find in your manual. That was Lenin in 1919, as the Soviet Union was fighting for its life. He writes a beautiful letter to the American workers. And how does he approach them? What does he say to the American workers? How does he speak to them? That's the way real communists speak, and that's the way real communists interact with each other. And I wanted to emphasize, one point that was made earlier by Robert that needs to be absolutely made is that we must not advocate a violent revolution. Scientific socialists have never advocated a violent revolution. And the reason for that is because working people do not want a violent revolution. Anyone who's ever lived through a violent revolution does not want one, right? It's a horrendous event. working people suffer violence in their everyday lives. And there are violence in their communities. And it is up to us to put forward not a vision of mass destruction and civil war and chaos, but rather a vision for building a whole new society. We put forward a revolutionary program. In order to enact that program, it would be a necessity to change the nature of the state and to establish a dictatorship of the proletariat. And a dictatorship of the proletariat would lead to the establishment of socialism. That is the understanding. It's about bringing forward a revolutionary program, a program of transitional demands or transitional projects that would change the nature of society. Right? In the Soviet Union and Russia, they had peace, land, and bread. And in the United States, we say we need a government of action that will fight for working families. We need a government of action that will fight for working families. We need a government of action that will fight for working families. Now, in your packets, you have the 4-point economic plan to rebuild the United States of America. And that 4-point economic plan includes a mass program of reconstruction of the country. It includes public control of natural resources. It includes public control and community control of credit and lending, and the enactment of an economic Bill of Rights. But I think that part of what we're going to do at the Center for Political Innovation is go beyond that. We are going to develop policy solutions that will push forward the working class. As we push forward a vision of educating people about scientific socialism and Marxism, we need to come up with some real solid proposals about how we would do it. And this is the United States of America. And one of the problems that we have, we talk about the open international system and the ruling class and their agenda for this country, is when it really gets down to it, the vision of the Rockefellers, the vision of the Carnegies and the DuPonts, the vision of the ultra-rich, the vision of the Silicon Valley fascists, they see the United States like this. They see New York City, and they see Southern California, and they see the United States as just a hub in a global open international system for trade. That's what they see the United States as. They see a global open international system, the world getting poorer, they staying rich, all the money of the world flowing into these two financial centers. That's how they see the United States of America. But if we are going to represent the American proletariat and the American working people, we have to see the rest of the country. And we have to look at the country as a country full not just of natural resources, but of people and communities and lives and people who are struggling and people who are desperate. Now, one of the big issues is climate change. You can't escape climate change in the United States right now. You can't escape it. You can't escape it in any part of the world. It's a serious problem. The fact that our environment and our climate is changing, global warming, this is a reality. But how do the ultra-rich see it? What is their solution? Well, yeah, everyone's just got to get poorer.
Degrowth.
Degrowth. Drive down living standards. Make people poorer in order to save Mother Earth. Well, we at the Center for Political Innovation have the real solution to climate change, which is getting off of fossil fuels. It is an emergency program to get off of fossil fuels. Russia has already called for international cooperation around building fossil fuels, and so has China. International cooperation for fusion energy, cold fusion. And so one of our demands is the construction of an international effort, a joint global effort to defeat fossil fuels, get beyond the fossil fuel economy, with the construction of Fusion City, an entire city where all the scientists from all over the world will gather and work on the project of building fusion energy. And we would call that Fusion City. And I think it would be located someplace in the center of the United States, perhaps Iowa. Fusion City. Imagine all the best scientists from China, all the best scientists from Russia, from India, from Latin America, from other countries in the world, all flying in to an international territory located in the heartland of the United States for something that would make the Manhattan Project look like child's play. When they tried to develop the atomic bomb, you know that they built this city in Tennessee, Oak Ridge, and they brought everyone in there for a crash program, an emergency project. Well, instead, we would have a global united effort not to kill people with atomic bombs, but to save people. A global effort to build Fusion City. Fusion City now! Fusion City now! Fusion City now! Fusion City now! And when one of these phonies comes around and is telling us that they're concerned about global warming and is telling us that global warming necessitates everyone getting poorer, we have a way to defeat them with one argument. And that is the question, are you for Fusion City or are you against it? That's the question. We get up, are you for Fusion City or are you against it? And if they really want to defeat climate change, they're for Fusion City. And if they're a hack and a phony pushing degrowth, they're against it. And it's that simple. And I can see people all across this country getting up in town halls and holding up and saying, are you for Fusion City or are you against it? And demanding an answer. But I can very easily see this happening. I can see people all across the country getting up and challenging elected officials about Fusion City. But we have another problem here in the United States. We have a problem on our border. If you've been looking at what's been happening, especially in the last few months, there have been all kinds of people trying to flee across our borders. In Texas, Arizona, New Mexico, so many people in Guatemala and Honduras and El Salvador can't live in their own country. Drug cartels have destroyed their lives. They don't have access to running water and electricity. And what does the right wing offer in response? Bigotry, a hate, a wall, demonizing immigrant communities. Yeah, and is that the solution? Is that going to help? Of course not. First of all, it's dehumanizing. It's terrorizing people. It's destroying people's lives. Second of all, what is the best thing you could ever do for MS-13? Right? Make the immigrant communities afraid. Push them into the shadows. Make it impossible for people to just walk across the border, so they have to cooperate with one of these criminal organizations. The criminal organizations that operate along the U.S. border benefit very strongly from these insane policies that the Trump administration and others have pushed. But what do the liberals offer? Well, Kamala Harris says not to come here. You know, just don't come here.
Do not come.
Yeah, what do they have to offer? Nothing. Just don't come here. Just don't come. Well, we at the Center for Political Innovation have a solution, and that's called the Sandino-Zapata Economic Corridor. That it's time for the United States and the government of Mexico and the government of China and the government of Nicaragua to have a joint project of economic development for that entire region. People in that region need jobs and healthcare and education. They need access to modern facilities and roadway. And it's a matter of national security for the United States, for Mexico, for Guatemala and Honduras and all those countries there. It is a matter of urgent necessity that there be economic development. You know, Sandino was the leader of the Nicaraguan Revolution. Emil Zapata was the leader of the Mexican Revolution. And so our demand is the construction of the Sandino-Zapata Economic Corridor. And again, when some politician gets up and says he's going to build a big giant wall and he's going to solve the problem of immigration, we can get up and we can say, now, are you for the Zapata-Sandino Economic Corridor, or are you against it? Then we can ask him, are you for it or are you against it? When a liberal gets up and tells some heart-wrenching stories and says they care about immigrants, and then when they get elected stabs them in the back, we can get up and say, are you for it or are you against it, right? And we will come up with a clear proposal of what we will do, right? The China that builds the fastest trains in the world and builds infrastructure all over the world, the Sandinistas of Nicaragua, the government of Mexico, they're going to be very good at it. This is just waiting to happen. And the market, of course, isn't going to do it. But as we know, in China and in Nicaragua, the market is not in command. Popular power is in command. And because it is a matter of national security, it could be done. It could be done. You could stop the problem of mass migration and people fleeing desperately on the border very easily with the Sandino-Zapata Economic Corridor. So there we go. We have that. That is our solution to the problem of immigration. We look at the United States at this point. You know, William Z. Foster, the leader of the Communist Party of the United States, in his book, Toward Soviet America, he argued that Washington, D.C. should not be the capital of the United States of America, because Washington, D.C. is a city associated with the slaveholders, but rather it should be Chicago, an industrial city in the heartland of the United States of America, right? That should be the capital. Chicago should clearly be the capital. And what would that mean? That would be changing the orientation, not seeing the United States as just a hub in a global trade route, but rather seeing the United States as a heartland full of economic potential. That is an orientation. Now, one of the greatest curses on the United States of America is car culture. As we've seen, look how difficult it's been to organize this conference, right? Car culture. Why do we not have accessible trains, right? Why do we not have the ability to transport? Why do you have to buy a car and fill it with gasoline and drive around? Should there not be mass construction of transit in the United States of America?
Oh yeah. Hell yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. But what country builds the fastest trains in the world?
China.
And wouldn't it be great if instead of having a trade war with China, we were inviting China to help us build a train system for the United States of America?
Yeah.
Our message to average working people shouldn't be that we want your country to fall apart with a big civil war. It shouldn't be that you're an evil Euro settler who deserves to be poorer as punishment for your sins in the past. Our message should be that with socialism, and with the banks, factories, and industries under the control of the people, with an organized economy that's set up to serve public good and not profits, we can build a whole new America. And we can wipe out poverty, we can wipe out unemployment, we can get rid of all these ugly imperialist wars. We'll dismantle this global system of capitalism where bankers and billionaires dominate the world. And we can build a whole new society, popular power. We need a government of action to fight for working families. And this is what I envision the Center for Political Innovation being, an entity that will put forward serious policy solutions, put forward a real revolutionary program, and push forward the consciousness of the United States. And no, I'm not interested in competing with the QWH and the XYZ and the ISO and the whatever. I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in getting out of the movement and to the masses. Out of the movement to the masses. Out of the movement to the masses. Out of the movement to the masses. Let's recite this. I was told this a long time ago, and it's a pretty good guide for how one should live their life. On a busy street in a busy town, I saw them tearing a building down. With a ho-heave-ho and a lusty yell, the men swung a beam, and a sidewall fell. So I said to the foreman, "Are these men skilled, like those you might hire if you wanted to build?" The foreman just smiled and said, "No, indeed. Unskilled labor is all that I need, for I could easily wreck in a week or two that which took builders years to do." So I thought to myself as I walked away, which of these roles have I tried to play? Am I a builder who builds with care, measuring life with a compass and square? Am I living my life by a well-made plan and striving to do the best that I can? Or am I that type that scours the town, content with the labor of tearing things down? There are two socialist movements. There is one socialist movement that has a pessimistic outlook and sees humanity headed toward a great apocalypse, and one socialist movement that has an optimistic outlook, believing in humanity's creative capacity and ability to solve problems. There is one socialist movement that views human beings as a cancer ruining Mother Earth and sees working people as an ignorant mob of rabble that need to be managed and controlled. There is another socialist movement that struggles for working people as the makers of history, the real heroes, and the struggle to advance human progress. There's one socialist movement that relishes destruction, and another socialist movement that celebrates building a whole new world. There's one socialist movement that seeks to destroy the United States, along with Russia, China, Iran, Venezuela, and every other country in a demented fantasy of permanent revolution. And there's another socialist movement that seeks to build a whole new world and stand arm in arm in solidarity with Russia, China, and Venezuela in a new global order based on win-win cooperation. There's one socialist movement that can be rightly called the Vandal tendency. It's inherently backward, right-wing, and destructive. But there is another socialist movement that we may be proud to call the city-building tendency. And I see the Center for Political Innovation as its incarnation on American soil. Thank you very much. We are city builders. 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 We are dare to win. Dare to struggle. Dare to struggle. Dare to win.
Has happened in America, and I think in the left in general, is that there is there's a lot of liberalism in just in our current culture. And this is the thing that people misunderstand. We're taught to think that, liberalism and there's liberalism and conservatism, right? There's left and right, and that's how it is. That's not how it is. The modern conservatives even are liberals. They're just, conservative on social issues, but liberals on economic issues. So this is not even, a real thing, right? But this is the problem, is that, liberalism is, never going to be an ideology that helps workers, because at its core, it is always going to be elitist. It is always going to be greed first. It is always going to be the individual first before the community. It is always going to be, me. It's never going to, it's going to be, I think that, what's the thing? It's like the educated, a lot of times. The educated, have, a lot of ideas. They want to be creative. They want to be, they want to build something. They want to be leaders in a certain way. But a lot of times I think that liberalism kind of teaches them to, sort of not see themselves as the people, as a teacher, as a revolutionary, as a preacher, as, a prophet or something else like that. They see them above. They see themselves as above the people, as a king, as a ruler of the people. And this is the thing: is being a teacher, being a leader, you have to realize that the people, the workers, are your teachers as well. You are not above them. A true leader is not above the people. A true teacher is not above the people. You are being taught by the people. And so we are all teaching each other. And this is the problem that liberalism has. And this is really the choice that we have, I think, as socialists, is that, it's either greed, elitism, all this pessimism and everything, nothing can be done, or it is community, solidarity, and, actually helping your community. That's really the choice. And I think that is the choice that we need to put to everyone. So.
Yeah.
Anyone who's watched Caleb for any sort of duration knows most recently he said basically we have 5 years, right? 5 years until liberalism becomes illiberal. We have 5 years to build this movement to a place where it is capable of leading the American people, building Fusion City, building economic corridors. 5 years. And so, I present to you, we will complete the 5-year Maupin plan in 4 years.
Yes.
5 in 4.
5 in 4. 5 in 4. 5 in 4. 5 in 4. 5 in 4. I love it. Well, tomorrow we'll talk about that plan. Yes.
That was a very inspiring speech, Caleb.
Thank you.
Really like your stuff. I mean, I was, involved in the socialist movement, and, a lot of folks that saw some of the wonderful and beautiful things that Stalin did, and the way he, revolutionized and created unprecedented growth in Russia. But then, as things got hard, and, the development of the labor aristocracy and this attack from the synthetic left, people kind of returned to what they could do. And they kind of and then looking at the world, and maybe none of this stuff that's happened since the Soviet Union is as good as what happened in the Soviet Union. And then you got the Trotskyites, who say the same thing, essentially. What I first described was, I believe, to be revisionism. And the second trend is Trotskyism, which is this Eurocentric, elitist perspective that it is these, liberal, intellectual, academic, petty bourgeois groups that keep the idea of Western democracy alive And all of these people in China and in Iran and Syria don't really know. It sounds a lot like the imperialists themselves. But then, kind of got out of the movement or whatever. I was driving down the road, and I didn't want to give up on the idea of socialism and communism. And I discovered Caleb Maupin and his YouTube broadcasts. And I listened to him going down the road, working. I was training at the time. I was working 80, 90 hours a week. And I working here this idea of hope that we can do something. They try, they attacked us with the synthetic left and the drugs. We're getting attacked from all sides. When they had the money, they bribed us, forming the labor aristocracy. When they didn't have the money, they started calculating all these plans to get us to fight amongst each other. Things are changing. And I think there is a portion of what is left of the original Communist Party within the United States that is the burning embers of the coming socialist movement. And the socialist movement, regardless of what the revisionists or the ultras or the Trotskyists like to say, continued in the global South. Yeah. There was people's movements, and Iran had a popular revolution where basically peasant people pushed to have control over their government to improve their conditions. Ba'athist Arab socialism in Iraq, in Syria, and leading the world, China, where they, after the horrors of the Cultural Revolution, were able to rebuild and improve the conditions of the people. And now, as the imperialist system is falling to the ground, it is the winds of change of the changing economic conditions, because they can no longer bribe us, and they're not that smart. They don't have the better ideas. Yeah. Their system is crumbling, and we, as the inheritors of the Communist Party, are the burning embers. The material conditions will push the masses of people to reclaim our destiny and build an anti-imperialist and socialist America.
Yep.
I don't know why this came to mind, but one of my favorite little quotes / sayings was, if I thought Democrats were socialists, I would hate socialism too. And I really resonate with that because I really hate Democrats. And but just that. But and what I really hate about Democrats, and what my family really hates about Democrats, and what I'm from Northwest Florida, a very conservative area. Matt Gaetz is the representative, what I really hate about Democrats is, they push this like chaos and austerity and just, this vision of like a horrible life for Americans. And I think for the longest time, socialists, almost sounded similar, abolish this or defund this. Mm-hmm. It sounds like austerity. It sounds like a vision, a very pessimistic vision. But I think that, pushing these bold and new ideas is so important to reviving a socialist movement, because it doesn't sound like Democrats and it doesn't sound like austerity, but it sounds like rebuilding, reinvigorating, and optimism, I guess, more generally. So, yeah.
I would just add that we should also not shy away from family values when we're talking to people and organizing.
Absolutely.
We should be very much, and the family doesn't have to be man, woman, whatever the family looks like. The thing is that we care about the future, we care about the kids, we care about the communities that we organize in, that we work in, and I think that it's really important. I think that jives with the message of hope, because other people say tear down the family, destroy the family, this and that. you're not going to get anywhere with that kind of language. You won't.
Yep.
You know, I've got kids. Some of us here have kids, and it's just not going to work that way. When you have a human being you got to take care of, you got to be responsible. So if we're going to be up there and be responsible and not be the trope that some of the others say we are, we have to exude that, and we have to show that. So I think we have to take it, and we have to really run with it while the rest of the synthetic left does what it does.
Yeah.
So while I've been, sitting back and watching the movement happen in Peru, and seeing the success of Pedro Castillo and Peru Libre, it has made me only more confident that the synthetic left must be defeated, that the synthetic left must be ignored, must be triumphed, that we are correct when we say we want to build a new country, build the United States, that we are not going to shame the other worker for whatever history, whatever legacy that their family had. You know, the synthetic left exists in Peru too. You know, they'll say the same things like, death to Peru, we're anti-Peru. Peru is a settler colonial state existing on indigenous people's rights and XYZ. And they're the same people that have been ignored. They're the same people that couldn't get, Veronica Mendoza couldn't get the Peruvian people's votes. But you see Pedro Castillo. Who is Pedro Castillo? He's a worker. He comes from Cajamarca. He comes from the Andean highlands. He's a socially conservative, but he's out of the masses. He's out of the Peruvian people. And he doesn't say he hates Peru. He waves the Peruvian flag. He's proudly Peruvian. And, you know, indigenous or not, he is a proudly Peruvian man, as most Peruvian people are. They want to be proud of something. They want to build a new country. And that's something that we need to do here. And it's something that we can do here. But as long as we continue to feed the synthetic left, as long as we stay in the movement and talk amongst each other with all this, you know, bullshit nonsense, destroy America, burn the flag, destroy the family, pessimism, we're never going to get anywhere. And I think that, you know, looking at the success of Peru, looking at how fearful the elite is over there, makes me more confident that everyone in this room here is doing, is on the start of something good.
I had a question specifically about the fusion city. I was just curious as to what you personally recommend as an alternative power source for fossil fuels to take its place.
Okay, very good. Okay.
So I realize, as we're forming our own wonderful segment of the left, which we really are the true heirs of the left, the synthetic left, and right now I'm noticing that the decolonization movement and the synthetic left are now effectively tied at the hip. And I want to bring up some foundations which are funding the decolonization movement, if I may. I know I'm not supposed to have my phone out, but I'm bucking the trend. Okay. So you got the W.K. Kellogg Foundation. That's number one. That they've donated $52 million. The
original NoFab.
You got the Novo Foundation. I don't know if anybody's familiar with the Novo Foundation. They're donating to various like nonprofits related to indigenous rights and stuff. So this is from a website that keeps track of this sort of thing. You got the Bush Foundation at number 4.
Jesus.
I don't know if that's related to George W., but it's still Bush Foundation. You got Andrew W. Mellon Foundation.
The Rotten Melons.
The Ford Foundation. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Yeah. Well, these are like all these foundations that are donating to the indigenous decolonization causes. So I think it's our job as Reds to inform our indigenous comrades that, these movements are being backed by the very colonial settlers that they are trying to defeat.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Actually, I wanted to ask if you could send that to
Yeah, I'll send the website, yes. if I can, it's fun. Name it issuelab.org.
NED funds,
Yeah.
indigenous rights.
Issuelab.org.
Oh yeah, all over.
All over the world.
All
From
over.
South America.
Bolivia was notorious.
Xinjiang. Who's there? Who's
What's
there?
going on?
U.S. labor law doesn't apply on native land. This is where the big current comes from. All U.S. labor laws don't apply on Native American land because it's not under federal jurisdiction. This is where the motivation is coming from. It's a labor issue.
Go ahead, Charlotte.
I just have one more question. Who are we? Oh, hold on. Who are we?
City builders.
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 Woo!
Michael in the back. Yeah, Michael. Yeah.
Hi. Can I ask your name first?
Me?
Yeah.
Caleb.
Oh, you're also Caleb?
Yes.
There's the other Caleb. There's the Caleb.
Yeah,
We're all Caleb. Yes, I just wanted to reiterate his question, but also build on it a little bit about the alternative source of energy, or what would be the proper source of energy for a fusion city. And I know that you speak a lot on nuclear energy and the need to develop clean and safe nuclear energy. But in terms of the Fusion City project, you know, that's a concern that I have too in speaking with the left, that the left is widely anti-nuclear energy.
Yeah.
And
That was mainly the reason I asked it honestly, because I support that also, and I was just curious.
you support fusion energy, the Fusion City.
Yeah. Using nuclear energy.
Right, and so, well, before listening to, you know, your streams, I really wasn't sure how I felt about it, because I know that, you know, the nuclear industry in the United States is so, you know, corrupt and pollutive, and the way things are done here, we could have massive catastrophes as a result of how nuclear waste is stored, the carelessness with which they do that, and the, you know, the horrors of the byproducts, the plutonium, and what that can cause to people, and then there's the accidents that the explosions that happen. And, you know, I was brought up in a CP USA family, and their line was always, well, you know, nuclear energy under socialism is different than under capitalism.
Yeah.
And then came Chernobyl, and they changed their tune on it too, and they became massively involved in the sane freeze movement. I don't know if you know, movement, because it also had support from, you know, the institutional forces, right? The sort of Brzezinski and Soros and these guys, and I wasn't aware of it at that. I mean, I was too young to know anyway. But lately, you know, I was only became aware of that very recently, actually, and largely as a result of your lives, and even on like Loud and Clear, a radio program of the, you know, run by folks of the Party for Socialism and Liberation on Radio Sputnik. They had a guy come on every week to camps. No, not Lee Camp. A nuclear watchdog group. I forget his name.
Like Bruce Gannon and all those types from like the space one, the anti-nuclear one in space.
I don't think so. It was more of a group that kind of works with lots of local groups, but is the major group in the country that monitors the violations of safety and health and the environment of the nuclear industry. And their position is get rid of nuclear energy. It's just not sustainable. It's not safe. It can't be safe. It's just way too risky. And so I think it's a very minority position, this one. And so how's that dealt with? You know, how can we approach people who should be our allies on this? And what science, you know, where's the science being presented on that? Like how safe it truly is, how we can avoid, you know, not just degradation of the environment, but like catastrophic events that can wipe out cities, you know,
Sure.
at a time.
Why don't I speak to this particular, since it seems like a theme in a lot, and then we'll go to the next, and then people can continue raising discussion points. So, you know, when it comes to the nuclear issue, it's particularly interesting because if you look at the anti-nuclear movement, when it started, many of the major communist voices in the United States were suspicious. right? They were suspicious, right? Gus Hall, around the time of Three Nile Island, he made the point in his article, and I've been doing research for a project I'm working on, a much bigger project I'm working on. Gus Hall said, we are not against nuclear power. We're for workers' control of nuclear power. We don't trust for-profit corporations to manage the nuclear power plants. But the idea that there's something inherently wrong with nuclear power, that's not Marxism, right? Marxism doesn't say that things are inherently wrong, right? It's similar to like GMOs. We're not inherently against GMOs. We don't trust Monsanto, and we don't trust Monsanto, but there's nothing inherently wrong with GMOs, right? And that when you start saying, oh, you can't play God by splitting an atom, oh, you can't change the gene, this isn't Marxism, this is primitivism. And that the main force behind the anti-nuclear movement largely was big oil companies. And that's very, very well documented, that they saw nuclear energy as a threat to their power. And big oil companies, that's the Rockefellers, that's the Ford Foundation, and that's the CIA wing of that fight. And who was getting contracted to do nuclear power? That was the military companies that are involved with nuclear weapons. And so part of the fight that was going on in the early Reagan years, it was this fight between the military-industrial complex that wanted nuclear power and big oil companies that saw nuclear power as a threat to them. But what you said about sane freeze is very important, because sane freeze and the anti-nuclear movement in the United States and the Soviet Union was a way that the synthetic left was able to create a back channel between the westernized wing of the Soviet Communist Party, the Gorbachevists, and the U.S. left. And that was what was done, right? That they would have joint rallies against nuclear power and nuclear weapons on the same day in the Soviet Union and the United States. And Bernie Sanders and a lot of liberals would fly over there and make friends and convince people in the Soviet Communist Party that the U.S. imperialists weren't actually so bad. Sure, Reagan's bad, but beneath the surface, most people are sympathetic to them. And the Gorbachev folks in the Soviet Communist Party really did believe that the United States would let them transition to become another Norway or Sweden. They basically, their ideology was watered down. They didn't believe in Marxism-Leninism anymore, but they thought, we'll become like a European social welfare state, and the USA will let us do that. And part of courting that and cultivating that delusion on the part of the leaders of the Soviet Communist Party was the anti-nuclear movement. So the anti-nuclear movement, and this is, again, the orientation that most communist groups had during the late Cold War was that the main enemy was the military-industrial complex. And it makes sense why they would come to that conclusion. That was the most immediate threat. The arms race cost the Soviet Union lots of money. The Vietnam War had killed millions of people. The Korean War had killed millions of people. The U.S. economy, military Keynesianism, and military spending is a big part of it. So the orientation that fighting the military-industrial complex should be the main focus of communist groups, it made sense. And it's what the Soviet Union wanted. It's what Vietnam wanted. It's what the anti-imperialist countries wanted. They didn't want immediate military threat. What we didn't realize was that we were in effect being dupes of the soft power apparatus, right? And that joining this effort against nuclear power was a way that we could help the color revolution industry set up shop in the socialist countries and build that problem. And I really like the folks at blackagendareport.com, because instead of instead of calling Barack Obama the lesser of two evils, they call him the more effective evil. And that is really what that Brzezinski soft power apparatus is, right? It is much more effective to slip American influence into a country, to set up an apparatus and a network of people, and then create a protest movement to destabilize the country and overthrow it. It's much more effective to do that than to directly militarily threaten them, right? When the USA directly militarily invades a country and blows it to shreds, that tends to isolate the United States. Like after Bush's invasion of Iraq, Europe was up in arms, and the world was up in arms. But if you, get friendly, and I'm really glad, Dust James, you talked about Libya. Because when we talk about the synthetic left, and we have the Green Book here, it's the first book we published as the Center for Political Innovation. What the synthetic left did during that crisis in Libya is absolutely unforgivable. The most prosperous country on the African continent was bombed and destroyed.
Despicable.
It is absolutely despicable. We saw the most prosperous country on the African continent, which I maintain was a socialist country. The biggest irrigation system in the world, the highest life expectancy. Under socialism, people from all over Africa were trying to get into Libya, right? Gaddafi had a policy that he would hire any African and give them a job. So people from all over Africa were going to Libya. It was, at that point, the top oil exporting country on the African continent. And now Libya has been bombed and destroyed. and it's been ruined. People are drowning on the Mediterranean trying to get out. The country is in a wreck. There are two rival governments fighting for each other. There's modern-day slave markets that have been set up. And the worst thing about it was, you know, there was a minority of those of us on the left they call tankies, and we protested it. And Minister Farrakhan and the Nation of Islam, they protested it. But all these Trotskyites and all these anarchists and all these social democrats, not only did they not protest it, they marched in support of the revolution. And if we can't talk about that treachery, and we can't talk about the river of blood between us and them, I mean, we have to talk about this. We're not just being sectarian. But you know, I mean, this is Gaddafi. This is a man who gave weapons to the Irish Republican Army, who gave weapons to the Palestinians, who gave weapons to the African National Congress and the people of Nelson Mandela fighting against apartheid, and the Black Panthers, right? And lots of civil rights organizers in the United States. This was a progressive anti-imperialist who took an impoverished desert country, he greened the desert, he built it up, and he was on the right side of history. Women's rights were far more in Libya than they were in any of the US-aligned countries like Saudi Arabia. This man was a progressive. And I will say this, and this may be a bit of a risk, but I believe that Gaddafi will be avenged. Revenge for Gaddafi. Revenge for Gaddafi! 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 Gaddafi will be avenged, and the synthetic left, right, the treacherous role that they played during that thing can't be ignored, right? The fact that they were supporting the color revolution. The day Gaddafi died, I was in Zuccotti Park with the Occupy Wall Street movement, and I learned something, because all the Trotskyites and the anarchists, they didn't care that Gaddafi was dead, but there were a lot of working class, Midwestern young people who bust in from Philadelphia or Michigan or Tennessee. And those folks, a lot of them were libertarians. They were confused. But they would say things like, you know, wasn't Gaddafi making an independent African currency and breaking away from the Federal Reserve and the U.S. dollar? And wasn't Gaddafi, he was fighting with Wall Street, and wasn't he trying to unify African countries? And even though they didn't have the ideology, they knew what side they were on. And they knew that the U.S. imperialists, as much as they dress up their revolution and aesthetics, they knew the U.S. imperialists were wrong, and they knew Gaddafi was on the right side. And those are the people that we need to give up this stupid ideology of libertarianism, these stupid conspiracy theories, and become Marxist-Leninists. So let's continue the discussion.
One of the first videos I put on my YouTube channel was a criticism of the HBO series Chernobyl.
Mm-hmm.
Because,
great video.
Thank you. Because that series was just like a complete propaganda piece. I mean, it was ridiculous to see the contrast between reality. Yeah, the party members were like deliberately made effeminate for some reason. Like when in reality they were like huge Soviet miners. Anyway, that's a topic for a different day. But anyway, what I learned is that from my research doing this video is that a good place to start in understanding nuclear power and where it can be done correctly is actually looking at Chernobyl, because after the meltdown, well, to give you a background, there were two main structures of nuclear fission creating power during the Cold War. There was the Soviet model, and there was a Western model that was more or less developed by the United States. And the Soviet model was a fraction of the price of the cost of creating the power and construction of the facility that the United States and the Western countries had to pay to create their model. And the West always made propaganda saying, oh, it's because they're cutting safety corners, and the socialist countries used to always say, no, this is like a great achievement of socialism because we can do exactly the same thing at like a fraction of the price. What happened in Chernobyl was actually an absolute freak accident. Of course, it was like a terrible tragedy and everything, but it was an absolute freak accident that actually brought the Soviet Union to review every possible other freak accident that could happen in this model of nuclear reactor, which, if I remember correctly, is called an RBK reactor. Mm-hmm. And they fixed all these problems. And actually, now this reactor, Russia and the post-Soviet countries, I think it's only Russia because there were only nuclear reactors in Russia in general. But Russia is the only country in the world that uses these nuclear reactors. They have like 5 or 6 of them across the country, and they're still used to this day. The same reactors that blew up in Chernobyl, but with all the problems fixed, and they still cost like half the amount of some sort of reactor that, for example, the one that was built in Fukushima and still melted down. So this would be a good place to look where they fix the problems of Chernobyl.
Yeah.
I'd like to briefly talk on the need to build the Zapata-Sandino economic corridor. And if you talk with the liberals about immigration, they will say, it is wonderful. We are the beacons of freedom and democracy, and people from all over the world come here for a better life because America is the first democratic revolution and the best country in the world.
As if people aren't fleeing for their lives, you know?
Okay. Now, if I could break it down to earth a little bit about my story. Like I said, I was trying to get money to buy books for college so I could buy the international editions and then pocket loan money to live on during the year. And then one of the times I was doing this was at this sweatshop called Coty, which is a cosmetics factory, make perfume and other things. And at that point time, before E-Verify, a large portion of the workers were undocumented. And it was so horrible the way they had it. I think in the 90s, temp agencies were 5% of the workforce. Now they're 35, 50% of the workforce. And these temp agencies are not actually temp agencies. These immigrants and working people in general have been working in this factory through these temp agencies for the last 10, 15 years for $8, $9 an hour with no benefits. And one time there was these bigwigs that came down from Jersey. They used to have a big Coty facility up in Jersey. And what happened in Jersey was they formed a union. They got tired of being paid $8, $9 an hour with no benefits, and they formed a union and they demanded their rights. So that's why there is a Coty facility in good old North Carolina, the Black Belt South, the legacy of slavery, right to work, and where massive amount of immigrant labor has poured into the state. Now, one of the things that they don't talk about, the right wing will acknowledge, but the left wing does not. Well, before I get into that, I got to talk about this one dude's comment. Dude from the bigwig came down from Jersey. Talk about. He was being cool with the floor manager, and there's kind of like this class of society. If the floor manager walked by, you kind of look down, don't really look at him, just like the feudal days. And we were all listening in on the conversation, and the North Carolina supervisor goes, "Hey, these workers are proud about their job. They love doing their job. They're not like those bad workers up in Jersey that will backtalk you and won't have a good attitude. They get paid very little, have no benefits, and are smiling and happy to do it." That's essentially what the conversation was saying. So what a lot of folks on the right will acknowledge, but not on the left, is that forced migration does bring down wages. That is a material reality.
Yeah.
And the reaction to that is not to have walls or raids or keep people in the shadows or all those horrible things. The answer is the Zapata-Sandino economic corridor.
Right.
And President AMLO is attempting to build in Mexico, is attempting to build the Mayan train in part of Chiapas in southern Mexico, and certain indigenous groups which have legitimate concerns are being funded by these people that Comrade Pella just mentioned to try and shut down the Mayan train. So we already got partners like AMLO who are starting to build the Zapata-Sandino economic corridor. And just how disgusting people like Kamala and these liberals are. that act like they're the friends of the people, and then push these policies. And I worked on the line with a lot of immigrants. I think one time I was sitting on the line, and the woman beside me just started bawling. She just started crying. And I asked her, why was she crying? She says, my mom is dying. I can't go back to Mexico because I'm undocumented, because I won't be able to make it back. And then the stories about rape on the border, the stories about abduction, these are just regular, everyday stories that people, and I lived in a trailer park that was a majority Mexican migrants, and this is just normal. This is what happened. Wow. And it's completely disguised from the media, and it's absolutely disgusting. And for workers here and workers in Mexico and throughout, we need economic development and prosperity for all people and all workers.
I want to say one more thing, is we don't need any more destruction. We need creation. No more destruction.
Creation.
What do we want? We don't want any more destruction.
Creation.
Creation, not destruction.
Creation, not destruction.
Creation, not destruction. Creation, not destruction. Creation, not destruction.
One of the goals of the CPI is to go out to the masses. I think it's important to talk to people about the value of their labor. For me, it was very eye-opening, just reading and learning about Marxist theory. Jeff Bezos isn't a billionaire just because he's lucky or he's smart. He's a billionaire because literally I can place an order tonight at Amazon, and someone for minimum wage, is working in the Amazon storage and is delivering it to my apartment, the next day. So it's really important for people just to realize the value of their labor and what it means. So just want to add that.
Absolutely. Anybody else? And then
I'll just be real quick, because that made me think of something. In 1919, they formed the Communist Party, USA, right? And since then here, they've been attacking us nonstop from every side. But that's, the unity of opposites. We've always been there. They've been going back and forth at us. And this new iteration of how Trotskyism has sort of morphed into this new Maoism or whatever is just more of that. But we're still here, right? Because you can't stop us. You just can't. It's a force of history. No matter what they do, we'll keep going, and we'll always be here.
Yeah. Okay, so I think Paul is going to play us out, right? Yeah. All right, cool.
Okay, there you go.
See, just make sure which sorry, got it. Yeah. Page number 11.
Oh, we'll rally round the flag, boys, rally once again, shouting the battle cry of freedom. Gather in the hillside and gather from the plain, shouting the battle cry of freedom. The Union forever, hurrah, boys, hurrah! Down with the traitor and up with the star. Rally round the flag, boys, rally once again, shouting the battle cry of freedom. Springing to the call of our brothers gone before, shouting the battle cry of freedom. Will fill their vacant ranks with 1,000,000 freemen more, shouting the battle cry of freedom. The Union forever, hurrah, boys, hurrah! Down with the traitor and up with the star. rally round the flag, boys, rally once again, shouting the battle cry of freedom. Welcome to our numbers, the loyal, true, and brave, shouting the battle cry of freedom. And though they may be poor, not a man shall be a slave, shouting the battle cry of freedom. The Union forever, hurrah, boys, hurrah! Down with the traitor and up with the star. Rally round the flag, rally once again, shouting the battle cry of freedom. 'Cause there's power in the factories, power on the land, power in the hand of the worker. But it all amounts to nothing if together we don't stand, shouting the battle cry of freedom. Joe Stalin was a mighty man was he. He led the Soviet people on the road to victory. All through the revolution he fought at Lenin's side. They made the combination till the day that Lenin died. He said, come all you people, we'll work with brain and hand. And then one day the Nazis came into the Soviet land. They plundered to the Volga, to Stalingrad, and then Joe Stalin said, come on me boys, he kicked them out again. Joe Stalin was a southerner, in Georgia he was born, where the oranges grow thick and fast in fields of waving corn. And Joe, he was a farmer, his fingers they were green, and he planned out the biggest crop the world has ever seen. One day he looked upon his map and frowned and shook his head. There's too much brown, we need more green, these were the words he said. We'll have to change the weather, boys, he said, and then he smiled. So let's begin by planting trees along 3,000 miles. Joe Stalin rolled his sleeves up and he said, come on, let's start. The Volga River and the Don, they are too far apart. I think we'd better join them, so come on, help me, pal. We'll build a mighty waterway, the Volga-Don Canal. One day he looked into the north and saw the rivers three, all emptying their waters into the polar sea. No, that's not right, Joe Stalin said, those rivers, they are ours. We'll turn them round and make them work to give electric power. There was a range of mountains that was standing in the way, so Stalin put his hand out and he smoothed them all away. For Joe, he was determined to make the land all green, and that was the biggest project that the world had ever seen. Joe Stalin was a mighty man, he made a mighty plan. He harnessed nature to the plow to work for good of man. He's hammered out the future, the forgeman he has been, and made the worker state the best the world has ever seen. He has made the worker state the best the world has ever seen. Woo! Thank you, thank you.